Welcome to Judge for Yourself. As you know, this is a particular program devoted in the main to the implications of the Constitution for South African life. One of the fundamental rights which should be enjoyed by all is the right to education, certainly basic education. One of the issues which confronts South Africa is what kind of education are we giving to our children? And are we preparing our children for a future for the 21st century? So the question we want to pose this evening is our education system in crisis? And if it is, do we have realistic responses thereto? Joining me tonight is Bernstein, Executive Director of the Center for Development Enterprise, and Dr. Stephen Taylor, Director for Research, Monitoring and Evaluation at the Department of Basic Education. Let me start with you, Bernstein. It appears that the Center for Development Enterprise has produced 5 reports on what you regard as a silent crisis of basic education. Well, obviously not everybody who's watching us tonight knows what you've written. I hope they will read it afterwards, but in essence, what's the argument that you're actually developing in these reports?
Dennis, the argument is quite simple to summarize. It's that South Africa's schooling system is large and complex, but it's underperforming very badly. If you look at the international tests in which we compete with other countries who write them, we generally come last or in the bottom 3 countries. The reading panel, which is chaired by the former Deputy President of South Africa, issued a report in February 2023 by Professor Nick Spohr, which said that at least 80, maybe 82% of learners at the end of grade 4 cannot read for meaning. They think things have got worse. Since 2019, when the President announced that every child should learn to read for meaning by 2030, but there is no budget and there is no program. So the bottom line is this system is not working, and it's time to diagnose the causes of that accurately and to actually do something profound about system-wide reform as soon as possible.
Okay, got you. Stephen Taylor, I was reading in preparation for this that the department has responded to these reports quite angrily, suggesting that they are exaggerating the crisis. Are they?
Well, yes, I think they are, and I think it's somewhat one-sided. So as the department, we certainly would acknowledge the challenges we have in the sector, even that the system is still performing in a low and unequal way. But what is unfortunate about the report is that it creates the perception that there is a deterioration. The report doesn't actually say that there's been a deterioration. In fact, it acknowledges that there has been progress, because indeed there has been progress on virtually every metric of system performance that we have. For instance, participation rates in schooling of all age groups have increased substantially over the last 20 years. The quality of learning, we are amongst the fastest improvers in the world, even though it's off a very low base, to name just a few. So it's just unfortunate that it's in the fine print that the report says that there's been improvement, because the perception created by the tone and many of the quite political allegations creates a perception that this must be a system in decline, which is not true, except for the impact of the pandemic, which we would concede. And as the department, we actually were the first to put that information out there.
But can I just ask you this? I mean, inter alia in the report, and it's been published elsewhere as well, it tells me that in the 2019 Trends in Mathematics and Science study, South Africa's grade 9 learners on a maths test designed for grade 8s placed us stone last in 39 participating countries. The 2016 Progress in International Reading Literacy study had the lowest average literacy score South Africa had out of 50 countries. Now, I mean, that's shocking. I mean, so where's the improvement if we keep coming stone last?
So those assessments are mostly undertaken by countries in Europe, North America, and East Asia. Very few African countries take part, and very few
is that
low-income
true?
countries
I
take
read
part.
that Kenya, for example, has far superior mathematical results than we do.
If you look at the Southern and East African region, there is an assessment consisting of 15 Southern and East African education systems, and we're above average in that region. Kenya does perform better than us, yes.
Well, let me stop there and ask you, how on earth does Kenya do better than us, given our resources?
They do better, largely. I think the quality of teachers. There is evidence of good subject knowledge amongst teachers in Kenya, but they're an example on the continent that many people look to, not only on the continent but elsewhere in the world. They do stand out as a above expectation performing country. But it's interesting that they also come to South Africa to learn some things from us. So it's not as if they are just performing ahead of us on every metric, but it is true that in one study on grade 6 maths and reading, they did perform better than us.
So, Anne, just on that particular point then, would it be true that you're comparing apples with oranges, meaning that you're citing studies which to a large degree are looking at countries which are higher up the development chain than we are?
Not at all. Dennis, there are a number of countries that are poorer than South Africa, that have had a colonial history, that have inequality and poverty like many of our communities, and yet still beat South Africa. I'll give you an example of teachers, for instance. So we found that only 41% of grade 6 maths teachers in South Africa have what's called good proficiency in mathematics. That's what the studies have found. But compared to 87% in Zimbabwe and 95% in Kenya, another example. But there are other places where Tanzania is doing better than us and places that are poorer than us. So we don't think that's fair. And I think one has to ask, why are we in this situation? And one of the reasons is the quality of our teachers. Professor Nick Spohr from Stellenbosch says that 4 out of 5 of our teachers don't have the pedagogical skills, the teaching skills, or the content knowledge that's required. But the other issue is that the minister herself appointed a task team after allegations of corruption in the appointment of principals and teachers. And that team reported in 2016, and they had absolutely devastating findings. They're essentially saying that there is what we're calling state capture, where cadres are put into the education bureaucracy and teaching positions. And they said that, I think it's SADTU said that in 6 of 9 provinces, SADTU is in charge of the management, administration, and priorities of education. The minister herself said that SADTU had a stranglehold over the education bureaucracy. So when we talk about competence of teachers, it's partly our history, but it is also partly a system of state capture, if you like, and corruption in appointments that infest the bureaucracy, and that none of these things have been fixed.
Stephen Taylor, how do you respond to that?
We take issue with the characterization of the 2016 report as state capture.
All right, can we park that? I don't care what you call it, but is it not so? I mean, the real substance of the criticism is that there is a practice, if you wish, I think, let's broadly use the word corruption, which is undermining the fabric of quality education for our children.
Yes, and the minister heard these allegations and initiated this exact commission in 2016. Yeah. The allegations are about corrupt practices at a school level. So this is not about capturing the national or provincial department. This is about school level appointments. And you're right to say that the Bella Bill, in part, is part of a response to those problems. In terms of the prosecutions, that aspect of it now sits with the police services. And for them, it's in particular the provincial departments who would need to collaborate with them, because provinces are the ones who employ teachers. So to the extent that there's wrongdoing at a school level in terms of school appointments, provinces have a key role to play, and prosecuting any criminal activity there would be now with the police. But as the national department and the minister, we certainly cooperated with the recommendations on that side.
But can I ask you one question before we take a break, which is this? Anne Bernstein has also raised the question of the unions, and the allegation being that the unions, to some extent, have captured the process of education. If Professor Spall's research is correct, and he's an outstanding researcher, it does mean that we've got a whole host of teachers not up to the task, and that are being protected in a way by the union. Is that correct? Does the department agree, and what's it doing about it?
Look, teachers are on the whole unionized, and SADTU is the largest union, so that's a fact. So I don't think. But
is it a fact that they're protecting the incompetent? That's what I want to know.
There are discussions and debates about the role of unions, whether they exert too much influence, but I don't think there's any clear evidence in that they're protecting teachers. People may have opinions about different forms of accountability systems that could be introduced, but I don't think there's something concrete to say SADTU protected teachers.
I suppose the point I'm simply... Yes, sorry, Anne, yes, you can respond with pleasure. Carry on, very briefly.
I want to add to what the Commission found in 2016, the task team, the Minister's task team. They found that, contrary to what Stefan's saying, they found that all the Deputy Directors General at that time were members of SADTU actively attending union meetings. Now, I'm absolutely in favor of unions. What we're saying and what the Commission said is you need to have a union for teachers, and that needs to be separate from unions for, let's call it, officials in the bureaucracy and office managers who are managing teachers. That you can't all be part of the same union, because then you have to say who is managing this enormous and complex system.
Okay, yes, it's important to emphasize the point that, quite rightly, our Constitution protects unions. The question isn't about that, I suspect. The question is what the balance is. But we'll have to explore that, but we'll have to take a break first.
SMS cover to 48721 and we'll call you back.
Welcome back. Let me ask you, Anne, just one question. What do you say to the response, Stephen's point, that a fairly kind of honest, not a fairly, an honest kind of concession that obviously there have been huge problems, but that things at least are starting to move north, in other words, starting to improve. And one of the statistics that they give, I notice, in their response to is an increasing number of matriculants who are actually getting degrees at university.
Let's talk about that, and it's important to see this all in a fair way. Mm-hmm. So there's no doubt that the education system improved from around 2005 to 2015, more or less. And as Stephen himself has acknowledged, partly this was caused by the introduction of one of the accountability measures we advocate, which were called the ANAs, the Annual National Assessments of every single school. This is good. But that and a special investigative unit within the department to look at issues and problems within, large swathes of schools was also established in 2011. Good. Both of those were withdrawn because of union opposition. The unit became a sort of not independent, and basically no one listened to it anymore, downgraded, and the ANAs were withdrawn because of union opposition. And the evidence that the experts are telling us, and the evidence seems to agree with, is that things were starting to either stagnate off an incredibly low base, or even start to deteriorate by 2019. We were then hit by COVID.
What is the evidence upon which you justify that, which is contrary as the word to the claims made?
The 2019 international study you read out earlier, which was slightly worse, not dramatically, but slightly worse than the 2015 one, or 2016. So that's the view of a number of expert researchers. Then we were hit by COVID, where, like many other countries, but South Africa's education department handled things in a particular way, and that has devastated learning in the country, and I think everybody agrees about that. So, yes, there was a period of improvement, but that seemed to halt off an incredibly low base. We were still at the bottom of international tables. Then you have the evidence from Professor Nick Spall and others of the inability of grade 4s to read for meaning, which they say is getting slightly worse, from 80 to 82% of learners who cannot read for meaning. And then to answer your question about matric, we have this annual festival called the Matric Results, where we're told the president says this is a system on the rise, a silent revolution, the minister system on the rise. But actually, when you look at the numbers, the facts are these. Learners who start in grade 8 and then finish matric are only 50% of that cohort. So 50% of the people in grade 8 end up not writing, they drop out, or they fail and repeat. And the numbers of repeats are very large. And this is just not acceptable.
But sorry, aren't you having your cake and eat it? Let's assume you're right about that, and I was going to put that point to Stephen, so I've got to assume that you are correct. But if the cohort who are actually getting matric are now improving in relation to getting to university and proper qualifications of a tertiary kind, isn't that at least some indication of some movement in the right direction?
Well, I can only quote to you from Professor Sefas van den Berg, another one of the excellent professors on education. And he said this about the latest matric results, which is he is really concerned that standards are falling, which a number of people have been arguing for a number of years. He's now saying it. I'm worried about this in a very serious way. And he's worried that Umalusi, the official body that kind of authorizes the matric results, has kind of smoothed it all out and is promoting underperformance. So he's saying, I don't really believe these results.
Okay, I wonder if I could put this to you, Stephen, in relation to this. I'm going to quote you what Professor Jonathan Jansen, who himself is an expert in these matters, wrote some months ago. He said, you are not going to build a strong education system unless the foundations of education, literacy and numeracy, science and maths are strong. When those things are strong, you then build on it. Politicians like Angie Motshekga and others have misled us into thinking that the measure of the health of the school system is the matric results. Very few kids get to matric. Half of them drop out along the way for various reasons. And so the measure of health of the system is how many children start well and how many of them continue further. So one way to fix the system is to put all the political and material attention, the resources, the attention on building a strong foundation. But that's not sexy politically. It really does take a decade or so to show concrete results. Isn't he right?
I mean, he is right that we need to build improvements on early learning foundations. But as we've been saying, those early learning outcomes have been improving. So
hang on a moment. We've all been talking about tonight. I have to interrupt you. If all of these children can't read for meaning, and that figure was given to me many years ago when I did earlier programs on education, it shook me then and it shakes me even more now. I mean, that means that these children will be condemned for the rest of their lives.
But the point we're trying to make, look, as the department, we're the ones who are very transparent and we participate in these studies. And the results have been shocking, but they've been improving. So the Pearl study, we improved from 2006 to 2011 and again to 2016 in terms of the percentage of children who did learn to read for meaning.
So
it's
tell
still
me this
too low.
now. How many children now, as it were, after 4 or 5 grades? I mean, I read in one of the reports, I think the CDE reports, that if you look at children after 3 years who can't even basically say the alphabet, what are these teachers teaching them, for goodness sake?
Anne will know that me personally and the department are the ones doing a lot of research on this issue of reading. It's a massive priority for government. The president has made it a highlighted goal, saying that all children need to learn to read for meaning by the age of 10. So we are in no way denying that this is a huge issue.
The president has made a goal that we should all have, that there should be no load shedding. And we're at stage 6 at the moment. What I'm really interested in is how are we going to improve the system, not what promises are made.
Yeah, and also how we have improved the system. I think that's an important question that the CD reports would have done well to ask. What caused the improvement in South Africa's education system
All right, I'll ask
over the last 10
that,
to 15 years? And the results continue to improve between 2015 and 2019. The term results at the grade 9 level, they improved from 2002 to 2011, from 2011 to 2015, and from 2015 to 2019. The only evidence we have of deteriorating learning outcomes is as a result of the pandemic in the early grades. And it was the department who measured that and who put that out there.
Can I ask you one other question, because I'm running out of time, and I want to give Anne Bernstein a chance as well. But just on this, is it the department's responsibility to ensure that we have that children are educated in schools where there aren't pit toilets?
Yes, it is our responsibility, but that is a big shift and change in tack when a lot of points and allegations have been made that need to be corrected around the learning outcomes. And we spoke, Anne spoke a lot about matric, and she spoke about the concern that in her view, about 50% of all youths actually complete matric. That statistic was about 40% in 2002. And it is now over 60%. So the stat is not quite right, but also it's improved substantially over the last 20 years.
Just let me go back. Are you improving the question that children do not actually have to be in schools with pit toilets, just to take a simple proposition?
That one also, we have seen significant improvements. The department is very soon going to be releasing the 2022 school monitoring survey, which we last did in 2017. And we have seen, I can tell you now that we've seen a substantial increase. Can I have you back on air when we've had that report? The report is due to be, the reports are being finalized. We expect a release in about June.
Okay, very good. And Bernstein, because I've got very little time, I'd love to carry on about the conditions of schools. But what do you say to Stephen's argument that actually your figures are not entirely accurate, that there have been improvements, particularly in all of the issues that we've just been debating?
Well, I think the department's response to the CDE reports is misleading.
Well, they say you
acknowledge, not in the small print, but in big print, that there were improvements from 2005 to 2015. We're debating what happened after that, but nobody debates that post-COVID, we're in a worse situation than before. The average 10-year-old
is that because of COVID? Is that because of COVID?
Well, that's one, because of COVID, which has, in the view of many, has wiped out whatever improvements were made till around 2015, 2016. The average 10-year-old today knows about as much as the average 9-year-old pre-COVID. That is terrible.
I did want to ask Stephen about that, but unfortunately I've run out of time, which is a great pity. I want to apologize to both of you in this particular regard. I'm sorry, we could debate this further, but I suspect when this further report comes out, I'd like to have both of you back so we can debate this further, because there's no question about it. We can debate about whether this is the most important issue facing us at the moment, but long term it must be. Because what education does, and by the way, as I indicated in my introduction, is a constitutional right, not just education, but I would hope decent education. The point is if we don't have an education in which children can read for meaning, in which they can be properly educated to equip themselves for the 21st century, really that's a crime against humanity, because it ultimately relegates them to a status which they do not deserve and which this country should not condemn upon them. In fact, it has an obligation to do exactly the contrary. How then, given all the difficulties that we've basically outlined in this program, are we actually going to get the system not just improved, but significantly better? Well, you've heard many of the arguments. You'll have to judge for yourself. Good night.
South Africa is a country under reconstruction. The challenges of poverty and inequality require all of us to put our heads together for sustainable solutions. Let's gather every Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday at 8 p.m., speaking truth to power and conducting conversations that build. It's Power to Truth with me, Onkgopotse JJ Tabane, every Monday to Wednesday at 8 p.m. And the best of Power to Truth every Saturday and Sunday at 2 p.m. Only on eNCA DSTV channel 403.